You prayed for breakthrough and instead got breakdown, begged God for relief and received more resistance, cried out for deliverance and encountered deeper darkness. Right now, you're probably wondering if you're doing something wrong, if God is angry with you, if your prayers are somehow making things worse instead of better. But what if I told you that this intensification of trouble after prayer is not a sign of God's absence, but evidence of His active presence? Not proof that your prayers aren't working, but confirmation that they're working too well. Because here's the shocking truth that most Christians never grasp. The moment you pray with genuine faith, you declare war on the spiritual realm. And hell doesn't retreat quietly, it retaliates viciously. Those problems that suddenly multiply after you pray, those situations that deteriorate the moment you seek God, those circumstances that spiral out of control right after you fast and intercede, they're not random coincidences or divine punishment. They're strategic counterattacks from an enemy who knows your breakthrough is imminent, who recognizes that your prayer has activated something in the heavenly realm that threatens his stronghold in your life. This is why Jesus warned in Matthew chapter 11, verse 12, that the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. Because prayer isn't a passive religious ritual, it's an act of spiritual violence against the kingdom of darkness. And darkness doesn't surrender without a fight. It strikes back with everything it has, targeting your weakest areas, exploiting your deepest fears, magnifying your most persistent struggles. Most believers are so shocked by this backlash that they immediately assume their prayers have failed, that God has abandoned them, that they must be doing something wrong, when in reality, the exact opposite is true. The intensity of the attack reveals the potency of your prayer. The severity of the backlash indicates the significance of what God is about to do. The fiercer the resistance, the closer you are to your breakthrough. Because Satan doesn't waste ammunition on ineffective prayers. He doesn't mobilize his forces against powerless petitions. He only launches full-scale assaults when he knows your prayer has breached the spiritual realm and is about to manifest in the natural. This is the first hidden truth you need to understand. Spiritual warfare intensifies at the threshold of breakthrough, not because God is absent, but because He's about to move mightily, and the enemy knows it, feels it, senses the shift in the spiritual atmosphere, and responds with desperate measures to discourage you, to make you quit, to convince you that prayer doesn't work, that God doesn't care, that your situation is hopeless. Sadly, most Christians fall for this deception, abandoning their prayer position right when victory is within reach, retreating from the battle right when the enemy is about to break, giving up on God right when He's about to show up. Because they interpret increased opposition as decreased divine favor, when it's actually evidence of increased spiritual activity, proof that your prayers have disturbed something in the unseen realm, confirmation that heaven is mobilizing on your behalf. This brings us to the second shocking revelation. God often allows things to get worse before He makes them better, because He's not interested in surface solutions. He's after deep transformation. Sometimes, the only way to uproot a deeply embedded problem is to let it fully manifest, to allow it to reveal its true nature, to expose its hidden tentacles that have wrapped around various areas of your life. When you pray for healing, God doesn't just want to treat symptoms. He wants to eliminate root causes, and those root causes often run deeper than you realize, connecting to generational patterns, spiritual strongholds, hidden sins, unhealed wounds, and toxic mindsets that must be exposed and expelled before true deliverance can occur. This is why that financial problem suddenly reveals relationship issues, why that health crisis uncovers spiritual compromises, why that career setback exposes identity struggles, because God is performing spiritual surgery. And surgery requires cutting before healing, exposing before restoring, breaking down before building up. This divine disruption feels like destruction, but it's actually construction. Feels like abandonment, but it's actually intervention. Feels like punishment, but it's actually preparation for the magnitude of blessing God is about to release. If you study Scripture carefully, You'll notice this pattern repeatedly. Joseph's situation got worse after his dreams, going from favored son to slave to prisoner before becoming prime minister. The Israelites faced increased oppression after Moses announced their deliverance, their suffering intensifying right before their exodus. Job lost everything after God bragged about his righteousness, his trials multiplying before his restoration doubled. Even Jesus experienced his darkest hour in Gethsemane after his most fervent prayer, sweating blood before securing salvation. There's something about genuine prayer that accelerates spiritual processes, that fast-forwards divine timelines, that compresses what might have taken years into seasons, months into moments. This acceleration often feels like chaos, like everything is falling apart simultaneously, when in reality, everything is falling into place supernaturally. This is the third truth that changes everything. What looks like things getting worse is often God removing everything that's not built on Him, shaking everything that can be shaken, as Hebrews chapter 12, verse 27 declares, so that only what cannot be shaken remains. This divine shaking feels devastating because we've built so much on faulty foundations, trusted in so many false securities, derived identity from so many inadequate sources. When God begins to answer our prayers for breakthrough, He must first break through our illusions, our self-sufficiency, our backup plans, our contingency strategies, our secret safety nets that we've maintained just in case He doesn't come through. Because God is jealous for our complete trust, passionate about our total dependence, and He will systematically dismantle every false refuge we've constructed until He alone remains as our source, our strength, our solution. This is why that prayer for provision might result in job loss, forcing you to trust Him completely. Why that prayer for healing might initially bring worse symptoms, eliminating your faith in medical solutions alone. Why that prayer for restoration might first bring complete breakdown, removing every human effort at reconciliation. Because God is not cruel, He's thorough, not vindictive, He's redemptive, not destroying, He's delivering at a level deeper than you requested, answering not just the prayer you prayed, but the prayer you should have prayed, addressing not just the problem you see, but the problems you don't see, solving not just the immediate crisis, but the underlying condition that created it. This is where most believers miss the shocking truth. The worsening is actually the working. The breaking is actually the making. The dying is actually the rising. Because God operates in paradoxes, brings life through death, strength through weakness, victory through surrender. When things get worse after you pray, it's often because God is accelerating the death process of everything that needs to die so the resurrection process can begin. You cannot shortcut this process, cannot bypass this breaking, cannot avoid this dismantling. Here's what's really happening in the spiritual realm when things get worse after prayer. Your prayer has activated a divine sequence that cannot be stopped, initiated a heavenly process that must run its course, triggered a spiritual chain reaction that will ultimately result in your deliverance, but first must deal with every hindrance, every obstacle, every resistance that stands between you and God's perfect will for your life. These hindrances often hide beneath the surface, camouflaged by coping mechanisms, masked by religious activities, buried under layers of denial and self-deception. When you pray with genuine faith, you give God permission to excavate, to expose, to extract whatever doesn't belong, whatever limits His work, whatever contradicts His word. This excavation process is messy, painful, disorienting. Like spiritual archaeology that must carefully unearth artifacts of past pain, remnants of old bondages, fossils of former failures that have been buried but not transformed, present but not processed, hidden but not healed. God, in His mercy, won't build His kingdom on top of this debris, won't establish His purposes on this unstable ground, won't manifest His glory through these cracked vessels until they're properly repaired, which is why He allows the cracks to widen before He seals them, the wounds to throb before He heals them, the problems to intensify before He solves them. Because superficial solutions create testimonies, but deep deliverance creates transformations. God is after transformation, not just relief. After revolution, not just resolution. After metamorphosis, not just modification. This metamorphosis requires a cocoon season where everything seems dark, restricted, impossible, where the caterpillar of your old life must completely dissolve before the butterfly of your new life can emerge. Most people panic in the cocoon, misinterpret the darkness as abandonment, the restriction as punishment, the dissolution as destruction, not realizing that this is the sacred space where miracles are manufactured, where ordinary becomes extraordinary, where impossible becomes inevitable. The fourth truth that will revolutionize your prayer life is this: God often answers prayers by first revealing what's been preventing their answer all along, exposing the hidden barriers you didn't know existed, the unconscious agreements you've made with limitation, the subtle partnerships you've formed with problems, the secret benefits you've derived from dysfunction. This is what most Christians miss. The worse things get after prayer, the closer you are to your answer. The more intense the battle, the more imminent the breakthrough. The darker the night, the nearer the dawn. God is not absent in the darkness. He's active. Not missing in the mess. He's moving. Not distant in the difficulty. He's drawing near. Every worsening situation is actually a setup for a divine surprise. Every intensifying problem is positioning you for an intensified promise. Every multiplying trouble is making room for multiplied triumph. Because God specializes in sudden turnarounds, instantaneous interventions, unexpected breakthroughs that come when you least expect but most need them. He's setting the stage right now, arranging the circumstances, positioning the players, orchestrating the elements for a demonstration of His power that will leave no doubt about His faithfulness, no question about His goodness, no uncertainty about His ability. When He moves, it will be worth every moment of worsening, every season of suffering, every experience of expansion, because you'll realize the worsening was actually working for your good. The breaking was actually building your future. The dying was actually delivering your destiny. You'll join the ranks of those who can say with Paul, in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that all things, even things getting worse after prayer, work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. That calling on your life is too significant for surface solutions, too important for temporary fixes, too valuable for partial deliverance, which is why God allows the thorough process, permits the complete breaking, authorizes the total transformation. Because He's not making you better, He's making you new, not improving your life. He's giving you His life, not modifying your situation. He's bringing total revolution. Revolutions are messy, violent, comprehensive, leaving nothing untouched, nothing unchanged, nothing unaffected, but resulting in complete transformation, total freedom, absolute victory. If you'll hold on through the worsening, press in through the problems, persist through the pain, you'll discover that what the enemy meant for evil, God is using for good. What hell designed for destruction, heaven is employing for construction. What was intended to break you is actually making you. Your testimony will be that things got worse after you prayed, but that worse was the doorway to your best. That breakdown was the pathway to your breakthrough. That crushing was the preparation for your anointing. Others will draw hope from your story, find faith from your journey, discover courage from your conquest, because you'll be living proof that God is faithful even when life is difficult, present even when He seems absent, working even when nothing's working. And the prayer you prayed that seemed to make everything worse was actually the prayer that changed everything forever.